Hello and welcome to Arnie's Short Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Haunted Mansion. The salty breeze from the sea had always been Holly Arnold's comfort. But today, as she stood before the mansion that loomed against the darkening sky, even the familiar scent of the Isle of Wight air couldn't calm her nerves. The house was imposing, an ancient relic of grandeur with ivy-streaked stone walls and windows that seemed to stare down, observing Holly and her family's arrival with cold indifference. "Isn't it beautiful?" her mother breathed, seemingly oblivious to the mansion's foreboding presence. Holly, who had always been sensitive to places, felt an immediate chill, as if the house itself were whispering warnings. The mansion had belonged to the Cranfield family for generations, an aristocratic line that once dominated the island's social scene. But for as long as Holly could remember, the mansion had been deserted, left to crumble and rot as the Cranfield line dwindled and finally vanished, leaving behind only whispers of scandal and tragedy. Holly's family had moved here for a fresh start after her father lost his job. Her parents had found the place charming and the price shockingly low. Holly, however, saw it differently. There was something about the mansion, something waiting within its walls. She just didn't know what. As the days passed, Holly's unease grew. Strange sounds echoed through the halls, footsteps that never matched her family's movements, whispers that only she seemed to hear, floating on the edges of consciousness. It began innocently enough. Holly would find doors she knew she'd closed left wide open, or the faint scent of jasmine perfume in the corridors, a fragrance no one in her family owned. Her little brother, Timmy, started talking to someone he called the nice lady. When questioned, Timmy explained she wore a long, dark dress and smiled but never spoke. Holly's mother brushed it off as an overactive imagination, but Holly knew better. She felt the weight of unseen eyes on her constantly. Then came the first night Holly saw her. It was past midnight when Holly awoke to a low, mournful humming. The melody wound its way through her room, pulling her into wakefulness. She sat up in bed, heart pounding. Across the room, by the window, a figure stood, a woman in a long black gown, her face obscured by a veil. The woman was humming, her voice delicate but chilling, as if each note pulled from a place of endless sorrow. Holly wanted to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. She squeezed her eyes shut, and when she opened them again, the woman was gone. Her father chalked it up to stress, her mother to bad dreams. Though Holly knew what she'd seen. Over the following weeks, Holly delved into the mansion's past. She visited the local library, poring over old news articles and faded records. She learned that the last Cranfields, a couple named Edmund and Eleanor, had lived in the mansion until Eleanor's tragic death. According to local legends, Eleanor had fallen ill just after their only child drowned in the pond near the garden. Unable to cope, Edmund secluded himself in the mansion, refusing to leave, descending into madness until he, too, disappeared. Rumors said Edmund had continued haunting the mansion, searching for Eleanor and their lost child. A shiver ran down Holly's spine as she closed the book. The details matched the whispers she'd heard in the halls at night, the cries of someone pleading and searching. It was as if the house were alive, reliving the Cranfields' despair over and over again. One stormy evening, Holly's mother sent her to retrieve Timmy from his room. As she approached, she heard him whispering, laughing softly. She paused by the door, listening. "Eh?" Timmy asked. A cold dread settled in Holly's stomach. He wasn't alone. Someone or something was with him. She burst into the room, heart pounding, but found Timmy alone, staring at the empty corner. His innocent eyes looked up at her. "She said she'd take me to play in the garden." "Who said that, Timmy?" Holly asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The lady. She says she misses her son and wants to show me the garden." The weight of her brother's words settled heavily on Holly, and that night she lay awake. She knew she had to do something. The spirits wanted something from her family, more specifically from her brother. The next night Holly decided to confront them. As the moon cast eerie shadows through her window, she tiptoed into the grand hall, clutching a flashlight. Her footsteps echoed in the vastness, and just as she reached the base of the grand staircase, she saw the figure of Alina Cranfield gliding down, her dark gown trailing behind her, eyes as empty as the sea. "Why won't you leave us alone?" Holly whispered, her voice trembling. The woman's head tilted, a hint of sadness in her ghostly features. Her mouth opened, but instead of words, a mournful wail erupted, chilling Holly to her core. Holly's flashlight flickered and died, and she was plunged into darkness. Heart pounding, she stumbled backward, but something icy wrapped around her wrist, a grip both gentle and desperate. Visions flooded her mind, images of Alina by the pond, clutching a small boy's hand, watching as his little body floated motionless in the water. Holly could feel Alina's heartbreak, her anguish, her endless searching. When the grip released, Holly opened her eyes to find herself alone in the dark hall, trembling. The next morning, Holly made her family listen. She told them everything, the history of the Cranfields, the tragedy, the restless spirits. At first, her parents were skeptical, but the conviction in Holly's voice gave them pause. That afternoon, they gathered around the pond, where the spirits of Alina and her child were said to linger. Holly spoke aloud, apologizing for their pain, promising they would leave the mansion if that would give them peace. For a moment, the air felt lighter, almost hopeful. But as they turned to go, Timmy wandered off to the edge of the pond, peering into the murky water. Holly ran to his side, but before she could reach him, she felt a chill ripple through the air. Timmy looked up, his face strangely blank, as though he were in a trance. "They want me to stay," he said softly, gazing into the pond. Holly pulled him back, away from the water's edge. "No, Timmy," she whispered, clutching him tightly. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the garden, carrying with it the faintest scent of jasmine. The ghostly figures of Alina and her child stood at the edge of the pond, watching Holly and Timmy with sorrowful eyes. Alina raised a translucent hand, as if to bid farewell, before the figures slowly faded into the mist that drifted across the water. The family left the mansion the very next day. As Holly looked back, the old house seemed to exhale, as if it, too, were finally at peace. But sometimes, late at night, Holly could still smell the faint trace of jasmine and hear the distant melody of Alina's sorrowful song echoing in her dreams, a reminder of the lives forever entwined with the haunted mansion on the Isle of Wight. The Arnolds left the Isle of Wight behind, settling in a small, sunlit cottage far from the mansion. Life began to feel normal again, no more strange shadows at night, no whispers floating through empty rooms. But Holly couldn't shake a sense of dread, a feeling that part of the mansion had followed them, lingering at the edge of her consciousness. One evening, as twilight settled over the new house, Holly's brother Timmy brought her a peculiar gift. It was a small, old-fashioned locket on a tarnished silver chain. He claimed to have found it tucked into his suitcase, though none of their belongings from the mansion should have been with them. Holly's skin prickled as she opened the locket. Inside was a faded photograph of a child with solemn eyes, Alina's lost son. Holly's nights grew restless. She would wake up at odd hours, the scent of jasmine filling her room, or catch glimpses of movement in the corners of her vision. And every time she looked at the locket, she felt Alina's sorrow, a longing that refused to be put to rest. It was as if the spirits were still searching for something or someone. The strange events escalated one night when Holly heard Timmy talking in his sleep. She crept to his room and found him sitting up, eyes glazed, a faint smile on his lips. "She says she'll come back for me," he murmured. Holly shook him awake, but Timmy remembered nothing. The incident left Holly deeply unsettled. She decided to hide the locket, hoping that burying it would sever whatever lingering connection remained between her family and the mansion. She took it out to a distant patch of the garden, digging a small hole in the moonlight and covering it over with damp earth. The next morning, Holly thought she had put it all behind her. But when she came down to breakfast, the locket was sitting on the kitchen table, gleaming as if freshly polished. Her heart pounded, a sickening realization sinking in Alina's spirit was not done with them. That night, Holly took the locket to the sea cliffs where the wind whipped her hair, the sea below roaring and relentless. She whispered a final apology to Alina before flinging the locket over the edge. She watched as it plummeted, swallowed by the churning water below. But Alina did not forgive so easily. Holly awoke in the dead of night to the unmistakable scent of jasmine, stronger and more intense than ever. Her bedroom was filled with mist, and in the center of it, Eleanor stood, her eyes hollow, her mouth twisted in grief and rage. "You give him back to me," she wailed. Terrified, Holly scrambled out of bed, running to her parents' room, but Eleanor's spirit was relentless, following her, her voice growing louder, demanding her son, her child, her life back. The next morning, Holly found herself at the edge of the cliff again, her mind foggy, her feet muddy. She couldn't remember how she'd gotten there. When she returned home, she found Timmy standing by the front door, clutching something in his small hands. Her stomach dropped. It was a locket, miraculously restored, with a new photograph inside, Holly herself, her face filled with fear. Eleanor's spirit had marked Holly now, and the mansion's curse had bound her to its eternal sorrow. Try as she might to escape, Holly felt herself drawn back, as if the island itself whispered her name, pulling her toward the mansion's dark halls and the restless spirit that awaited her there. And in the shadowed corners of her mind, Holly knew she would return. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.